let's go ahead and begin. My watch and my smartphone, one of them's not as smart as the other. I don't know. I think it's my watch. It's not a smart watch. It's just a smartphone. Good to see everybody tonight. We're going to continue with our study of Habakkuk in just a moment. But I did not ask anybody to lead prayer, so I'm going to go ahead and just lead that myself. So let's begin with prayer as we begin our time of Bible study together. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful to put aside the other things of the world tonight. Come together, encourage one another, glorify you, and study your word. We would ask that you would be with us as we study from the words of your servant Habakkuk tonight. Father, may we learn from them as he gives us the questions that he has asked and the answers that you've given. As we learn from the mistakes that were made by your own people, Judah, as well as by the many nations that were around them that turned their backs on you. Father, bless us with understanding and the ability to say that this is something that will help us today as we consider what happened here. Father, we ask in a special way for all those that are on our minds tonight. Very lengthy, many listed in the bulletin, many beyond that we're thinking about. And we pray, Father, for all that can be done for them. It might be as much good as possible, that we might be used in the service of encouragement, and that all those who need strength to deal with the things of life might find that strength in you, the true source of power. Bless us as we continue tonight, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Habakkuk chapter 2. This is a little mashup here with some significant words from the book of Habakkuk. If we should end with time left over tonight, yeah, sure. We might talk about some of those and see what you think you remember from the book that might apply to one of those words. We're studying the book of Habakkuk. This particular template, although I didn't choose it for this, just happened to say an outcry to God. And that is what Habakkuk was doing. He was asking questions that were on his mind, perhaps were on the people's minds of Judah. Remember, it's just Judah now. Israel is gone, been in captivity for several years, and Judah's time is almost up as Babylon is going to take them captive. We're talking this quarter about three minor prophets, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. Tonight, Zephaniah there, as you can see, overlapping with good King Josiah, wicked Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. And very close to the end of the time that Judah was really had any self-rule at all, even though they had, Zedekiah was barely a ruler because he served at the pleasure of Babylon, and when he didn't please Babylon anymore, then he was gone. Another little outline here by our brother Homer Haley many years ago made out. We're talking about 7th century prophets, the Chaldean or the Babylonian period. Chaldean and Babylonian have come to be basically synonymous. And all of them, as the 7th century basically is coming to a close there. The outline of Habakkuk is really pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And the structure goes like this. It doesn't exactly match up with chapters. We wish it did. We wish that guy that was riding along on his horse, centuries ago and marked off the chapters of the Bible and all that, we wish he'd done a little bit better job of it. But, sometimes they say he had the manuscript and his horse hit a bump and his pen moved and he said, okay, I guess we'll make a chapter there. I don't know if that's true or not, but he didn't always do a good job in assigning these chapter numbers. But here it is. The first few verses, we get right into it. Habakkuk says, Lord, here's the first question. Why are you delaying in straightening things out in Judah? Because Judah's a moral mess. Why do you delay? Why do you let good people be punished and wicked people get away with it? Why are you doing that, Lord? Much of the rest of chapter 1 is God's answer to that. We've talked about that last week. And then Habakkuk's second question, which unfortunately is part of the second chapter as far as our memorizing the outline. We're going to look at that in just a moment to review. And then we'll start tonight in chapter 2 and verse 2. Or actually, we'll read verse 1 too. But God's answer to that question. And the question was, Lord, okay, you're going to do something about it, but why in the world would you use someone as wicked as Babylon to punish your own people? Yeah, I know they're bad, but they're not as bad as Babylon. Why would you do that? And then chapter 3 is the really good stuff. It's Habakkuk's prayer of confidence in the Lord. And then the last few verses, his declaration of faith is a good name for it. So we continue tonight. Here's the question back in chapter 1 that was asked by Habakkuk. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have appointed them for judgment. O rock, you have marked them for correction. You are purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Okay, he's describing God, and he's exactly right about the nature of God there. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he is? In other words, even though people do wicked things and they make mistakes, why do you allow someone who's more wicked than them to prosper long enough to punish them? Why do you do it that way? So the Lord is going to give Habakkuk the answer, at least all of the answer that he wants. We're talking about somewhere between 612 BC to maybe 598 BC, the latter part of the 7th century, when Habakkuk is writing these words and the doom of Judah is upon them. Okay, Habakkuk chapter 2. We get into the text that we have not talked about yet. This is where we got to last week. Habakkuk has asked his question, and now he's primed, he's ready for the answer. In fact, he says, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart. Now, he gives us a picture here of, in the ancient of times, when the highest place was the place that the watchman looked out from for danger. That was just kind of a given. That was a standard in those days. You know, no radar, no infrared, no satellites flying around the earth, no fast communication. So it was crucial that somebody stand at the highest part, probably of a city wall somewhere, and then the rampart, a tower, something built up from that, and that would be the watchman. He'd be watching it. I didn't do that, I don't think. But there we go, thank you. Nick looked at it real hard. It came right back on. I saw him. He gave it the fixed look. So here's how Habakkuk pictures himself. He's up on the top, and he's looking, and he's saying, now God's going to answer, and I'm going to be ready for it. Now, this, of course, we would think this is probably figurative language. We know that Habakkuk didn't have to stand at the top of the tallest point, in Jerusalem to hear what God had to say, to hear God's answer. Now, if God told him to do that, then I'm sure that's what he was doing. But we don't have any indication that was the case. So we see this as a figurative way. Habakkuk was ready to hear God's answer. He wanted to hear God's answer. And watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer him when I am corrected. Now here we begin 2 or 3 places in this chapter in which the translation of the Hebrew is a little bit tricky. And if you have one translation of the Bible, this last phrase may say one thing. If you have another translation, it may say something else. And no, I don't have a slide on that. But the various translations translate that either I will answer what I will answer when I'm corrected, which would have Habakkuk saying, now the Lord is going to reprove me. He's going to say, Habakkuk, here's the answer, and why did you even ask this question? What I will answer when I am corrected. That is one of the ways, and that is the King James, the New King James, the New American Standard. But if you have the American Standard or the NIV before you, or perhaps some others too, it says, how will I answer concerning this complaint? Which also could mean, and probably would more likely mean, God's going to give me the answer. Now, as I go out and tell people about it, what's my answer going to be? The complaint was the question. It wasn't so much a complaint like we use that word. It was a question to God of something he didn't understand. So Habakkuk is doing one of two things. He's expecting God to correct him, and he's just waiting to hear that. And he's preparing himself for God to correct him, to even, I think some translations say rebuke or reproach. Or he's saying, I'm going to have the answer now to this complaint. When somebody in Judah who is a righteous person comes to me and says, why is God letting this happen? Well, he already had the answer to that. When somebody from Judah who is righteous, a minority among the majority, comes to him and says, what do you mean Babylon is going to punish us? He said, I've got the answer. Because I'm standing here waiting, I'm just listening to hear God, and God is going to give me the answer. So one of those two is true. I'm inclined to believe that the better translation is, I'm going to get the answer to the complaint so I can tell other people. Because I don't read any other place in here where there's a sense of Habakkuk being corrected or reproached by God. I think these were legitimate questions. And God not only approved of Habakkuk asking these honest, sincere questions, but he approved it so much that he had Habakkuk write it down so other people could read it. So I don't think Habakkuk was being corrected. I think the other translation is probably better. But either way, we're not talking about any kind of fellowship issue or anything like that. Just to know that the people who translate Hebrew, who know a lot more about Hebrew than I do, and perhaps anybody else in here that's thinking about this, those are the two possibilities that they have. But anyway, the point is he was ready to listen to God. There was no doubt about that on Habakkuk's part. Now, as he continues, the Lord's answer continues. The Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. So this was not only an explanation to be given to Habakkuk, it was one that was to be shared. Now, here's the second time that the folks who translate Hebrew into English don't always agree. And we're talking about, very learned scholars. That he may run who reads it, which suggests to us that when he writes it down, Habakkuk writes this message down, that people can take that and they can run out among Judah and share it with everybody. Here's the answer, folks. Here's why God's allowing this for now. Here's what he's going to do about it, and here's why he's using Babylon. They could run out and tell everybody. Wide distribution. Now, again, some translations, I do have an example of this in just a moment. Some translations suggest that it should say, make it plain enough for a runner to read. Now, what's the difference in that? Well, we're talking about large letters so that even somebody running by could look over, I can read that from here. And of course, I think he's talking figuratively here. He's giving us imagery. Have you ever tried to read a text on your smartphone while you're running? Is it easy? Have you ever tried to text while you're running? Paying attention to that small stuff, if Habakkuk had written this down in perhaps the common style of writing, and we're talking literally here, and remember we're really thinking figuratively, it would be, you had to get up close to do it. So the other translation has writing it in such a way that it's clear and easy to read and very understandable so that it can be widely distributed and clearly understood. Now, both of those things sort of go together, right? Because that's what the Lord wanted with his message. And he was speaking probably figuratively here as far as large letters. He was saying, I want anybody to be able to see and understand this message. And the runners can run out with it, or anybody who runs by can be read quickly and easily and understood. Here's some of the translations, and you see the first four are very close. He that run, that he may run, that readeth it. He may run who reads it. The one who reads it may run, thinking about, quick distribution. Write this down so everybody can read it. Or the New Revised Standard says, so that a runner may read it. There's some other major translations. Dennis? Okay. Dennis provides us with a third idea here as far as your imagery, and that is when God's judgment comes, which of course is what Babylon was when Babylon came. He sees people who could actually, this would be before them even as they're running, perhaps for their lives or something like that, as destruction comes upon them. So that's another aspect of it. But the one thing that all of this shares is God wanted everybody to be able to know this. And even, at least in this case, apparently a short time before Babylon came and the enemy attacked. Kendall? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you couldn't hear that, Kendall said he sees it being applied to the person who reads that. It should be clear, understood, and clearly obeyed to them when they read it, the reader of this message, rather than someone running with it. So, again, one thing this all shares is God wanted this message to be known. Right? He wanted this message to be communicated. How well it was communicated to wicked Judah, we will never know this side of heaven, because the Bible just doesn't tell us. But that was God's intention anyway, that this be a well-distributed and a clearly understood message. Now, I think we've got to go back for some more of that verse. That's the problem with PowerPoint, when you got to go back and forth a little bit here. But let's keep reading. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. In other words, this is something that's coming up, and the time is already set. This message, this vision that Habakkuk was given. And because it was already set, people needed to know about it. That's why he was giving the message to Habakkuk. But at the end, it will speak, and it will not lie. The message that Habakkuk is delivering, it's going to be known. It's not yet. It's an appointed time. It wasn't, as far as we can tell from history, wasn't very far away, a matter of a few years. And it was going to speak loudly when it came, and the truth was contained within this message. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Now, what do men have a tendency to do? Whenever something doesn't happen tomorrow, our microwave drive-through generation, and men have always been pretty much that way before microwaves and drive-throughs. They want it to happen quickly. He said, now wait for it, but it will surely come. It won't tarry. Yes, sir.
I look at that and I think that could feel
The coming of the Messiah you're talking about? Okay. The coming of the Messiah. And I think later on in chapter 2, there's some very clear stuff that's kind of laying the groundwork for the Messiah. Kind of hinting at the Messiah coming. Because, we'll just wait till we get there and see the verses. But yeah. So, of course, all this message goes together, right? Everything that God did from Genesis through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the scheme of redemption, right? So it's all tied together. We don't read about the prophets and their interaction with God's people just to read a history lesson. We're reading about the Messiah from the very first time, Genesis 3:15, until he comes in the Gospels. So you can always find a little bit of the Messiah in so many passages. All right. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Now, the proud, is possibly, to some people, Judah. But I think, and a lot of the people that write about this think also, this is probably already pointing ahead to Babylon. Because remember what his question was. Habakkuk's question was, how could you allow this, God, this evil nation? So God is about to tell Habakkuk what's going to happen to Babylon too. So I think we're leading into Babylon right here. But if you say, well, you know, a lot of Judah was proud too. They were wicked. That's why God was allowing them to be punished by Babylon. Okay? And the just shall live by faith. Remember we talked about this in the introduction, right? How many times in the New Testament? How many times in the New Testament? Okay. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. 3 times in the New Testament, Romans 1:17, Galatians 11, Hebrews 10:37 and 38. We did not look at those as we went through the introduction. It is my plan tonight that we look at them very briefly to see. This is the most, obviously the most quoted verse out of Habakkuk, most quoted verse out of Habakkuk in all the New Testament 3 times. And in fact, there's not lots of other quotations from Habakkuk. But this one, 3 times. Romans 1:17, Paul's affirmation here about faith. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in the righteousness of God, in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written. Who wrote it? Habakkuk. About 600 or so years before Christ was born. The just shall live by faith. So there we have it in the New Testament. Second time, Galatians 3:11, Paul says, but that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident, for the just shall live by faith. And of course, what was Paul talking to the Galatians about? Don't go back to the old law. Very, very strong message in Galatians. Don't go back to the old law. The old law was never intended to be the final part of the story. The just shall live by faith. And the one in whom you have real faith on this earth is coming, the Messiah. Or in this case, it already come. All right, and then finally, now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, the Hebrew writer says, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. True faith, the just shall live by faith. So 3 times this passage from Habakkuk 2 and verse 4 is mentioned, quoted in the New Testament. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, talking about the appointed time, I meant to say this. The appointed time we know now, and obviously they didn't know exactly, but we know now it was 539 BC. Because that was when the Medes and the Persians came and overran Babylon. And this great power Babylon was no more. And they were reduced to, pages on the history book. And then the Medes and the Persians were in charge, and they established their own empire, 539 BC, which of course had all the difference in the world as far as the Jewish exiles were concerned who were there in that territory. When Persia conquered them, what was their policy? Send people back to their homeland. We want strong homelands of the people that we control. We don't want to make them weak. We want to make them strong under our leadership. So that's when the Jews came back in 3 different groups to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Okay, we continue with Habakkuk 2 and verse 5. Oh, we got to go. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home. It's got to be Babylon. What was Babylon doing? They were drunk with power. We use that phrase today, don't we? Drunk with power. It's one of those things that can make somebody do some really amazing things sometimes when they have power and it gets the best of them instead of the morals, the virtues, the values that they should have. Babylon was drunk with power. Proud man. Drunk with arrogance too. And he does not stay at home. Went all over that part of the world. Remember the map that we showed? We'll see it again in just a moment for another point. But the Babylonian Empire was huge. Some places it extended further than the Assyrian Empire. Some places it wasn't quite as big. but it extended in that part of the world. Because he enlarges his desire as hell. Enlarges his desire. Babylon was never satisfied. We'll see that again in some more verses in a moment. Never satisfied. They couldn't stay home. They couldn't just say, you know, look how we've been blessed. What do you say we don't make war anymore? Let's just enjoy these fruits. But no, they couldn't do that. Whatever the reason, whatever the thinking, they were never satisfied. Because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he's like death. It cannot be satisfied. There's the phrase, cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. They wanted to be in charge of everybody, the power of the known world. I guess that's what any empire back then really wanted. Whether it's them or the Assyrians or Medes and Persians or whoever, or Alexander the Great. Well, that's what they wanted. And they would not be content with anything else. Okay, will not all of these take up a proverb against him? All of these, those nations that had been conquered, they'll take up a proverb against him. And this is anthropomorphism. Babylon is presented as a man. Okay, this is not a one person, unless you want to focus on the emperor of Babylon perhaps, but it was really all of Babylon. Him is Babylon. They're a general overall view of conquering the world and treating people. Will not all these nations that they've run over for all these years, take up a proverb against him? Now this Hebrew word proverb here literally means, and let me turn to where I wrote down what it literally means, just to be sure I get it right. A song of jest, ridicule, and mocking. Okay? That was going to happen. When was that going to happen? Was it going to happen before Babylon fell? Oh, no. You didn't jest or mock or ridicule Babylon before. It was going to fall. That's what Habakkuk was telling them. Eventually, it was going to fall. Yes, it was going to punish Judah. There would be 70 years of captivity, but then Babylon was going to fall. Woe unto them. And everybody was going to be with this mocking, this proverb against them, a taunting riddle. We know what taunting is, making fun of somebody, saying, yeah, look at Babylon now. That was what was going to be said, although nobody could imagine that. Just like nobody could have imagined that Nineveh and the Assyrians were going to fall, right? As we talked about back in the book of Nahum. Nobody. I tell you a thing that you would not believe, Nahum said. Yeah, nobody would have believed this either, really. Okay, the first of 5 woes. Woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Babylon said, I'll take anything I want. I'll make all the promises I need. And probably they did make a lot of promises. Their negotiations with people and then perhaps even taking them over in the process. But their pledges became debts that they owed, not so much physically as anybody wrote a piece of paper or anything like that, but their actions caused them to sign loan papers. And it was all going to come back. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Who'd they owe to? All these nations that they had mistreated. All these nations they had taken everything from and the people too and destroyed what they had. The note was going to come due. Will your creditors not rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. The plunderer becomes the plundered. That was the fate of Babylon. And not that many years ago, less than a century to go. Because of men's blood and the violence of the land, the city, and all who dwell in it. They were cruel people. We talked about the Assyrians being cruel people when we talked about the book of Nahum. Well, Babylon, not especially different. Empires like this tended to be pretty cruel and pretty bloody. So they had blood on their hands. And the creditors were going to rise up in 539 BC or so and say, time to pay up. And they did. They did. Okay, second woe. There's going to be 5 woes here. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. Now, what do you think of the bird that builds a nest top of the tallest tree he can find versus that little bird that builds one in the bush beside your front door? Which one is safer? Generally speaking, the one up in the top of the tall tree, right? He has removed himself further from most of the dangers. That's the picture we're trying to see here. That little one by the house there, he's so low that a lot of things are going to get him. Haven't we all seen bird nests built low out around our house or something, and we go out there and all of a sudden there's nothing in it. Some kind of predator got to it. But you're safer up in the top. Build your nest up high. That's what Babylon said. Oh, we're going to build our nest so high in a tree that we are going to be delivered from the power of disaster. Nothing can hurt us. That's what they were saying. Oh, we're so strong. Our walls are so thick. Our army is so big. Our gods, little g, are so powerful. Nobody's going to bother us. That's what they thought. So this evil gain that they were getting, which was what belonged to everybody else, and it was flowing back to Babylon, they were using that to build up an empire and to say, nobody can ever overcome us. We're too strong. So that's where their evil gain was going to. I was trying to think of another word, but we'll just use gain. That's a word that's there. That's where they were going to. Okay? You give shameful counsel to your house. We're still on the same woe here. Cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Shameful counsel to your house. They were telling themselves, we've got to be strong, we've got to keep building, we've got to keep overcoming, we've got to keep conquering people. That was the talk within Babylon. Was there anybody that ever said, you think we probably extended far enough here? Don't know, but it didn't take if they did. That was their attitude. They were telling themselves, let's keep on warring. What was going to happen was these houses, their buildings, had been built on the bodies of those that they'd conquered. They'd killed people to bring back their possessions to build this great kingdom. And so, again, we've got an anthropomorphic house here, talking like a person. And the stones cry out. And then the wood, the timbers in the house say, yeah, you're right. We are built on the bones of those who have been conquered by Babylon. So, imagery, but that was the fate of Babylon. That was the condemnation of Babylon. Okay, woe number 3. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Think of, as you picture this, think of the Israelites in Egypt. When you picture them, what do you picture? Anybody here that hasn't seen Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments? Yeah, we got a picture. Pretty good movie. If you haven't seen that, you need to see it. Not perfect, but a lot better than most movies today about Bible stories. And you see these pictures of how slaves were treated and how they were making bricks and how they were hauling stones and all of this slave labor. That's what Babylon was doing for their empire. And so slave labor, blood, the bloodshed of slaves, the bloodshed of the people they killed to bring people back as slaves when they conquered a country, that's what was establishing them. Their prosperity was built on everybody else's sorrow around them. Now, that's pretty wicked, isn't it, for a country? He continues, behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations, is it not, I'm sorry, this is a question, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? In other words, you're doing all this, but if it's in vain, because the Lord's not going to allow you to prosper with so long. He's going to use you the way he wants to, and then you will fall too. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, that, I think, is at least a mild pointing in the direction of the Messiah. Now, it is also true, and we've seen this map before, that, and I hope I can come back to it in a minute because I've got a reason for that, but the voice of the Lord was going to scream out over the ancient Near East, which is what this was called. And Nineveh, Assyria, was going to fall to the Babylons. And everybody say, wow, look what Jehovah God did. And then the kingdom of Babylon was going to fall to the Medes and the Persians. And God said he would through his prophets years before. And so everybody would say, wow, look what the real Jehovah God has done. And so in a sense, Jehovah God's name was going to be, spread like a sea across the land. Here was proof of the power of Jehovah of the Israelites, Jehovah of Judah and Jerusalem, and of the temple in Jerusalem. But I believe that probably we can think about the idea that there's kind of a dual image here of Jesus coming later on and covering, the Messiah coming and covering the world as well. I think about Colossians 1:23, about the gospel being preached to every creature under heaven, when Paul speaks it there somewhere in the 60s AD. Covered like the sea, the gospel went out so that it went to every land, every peoples. So, if that's not hinted at by Habakkuk here, that's okay. We still know it's true, don't we? That it covered the world as the waters cover the sea. Now, while I've got it here, please make note, because we'll think about this later, this region right up here. This was what is known as Lebanon, and still is today. I don't know if it's the same exact territory, it probably isn't. But what do we think about when we think about Lebanon? What trees? The cedars of Lebanon. That's what they were known for. Okay, we're going to see that in just a moment again as we come near the end of this chapter quickly. Okay, another woe, number 4, I believe it is. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look upon his nakedness. Okay, again, imagery, not a physical getting somebody drunk that you can see them naked. Okay, this is a picture of tricking somebody so that you can shame them, overpower them, overcome them, take what is theirs, destroy their land, take their property. I mean, that's a picture of the way Babylon worked. Get your neighbor drunk, you can take advantage of it. The word pressing there, pressing him to your bottle, means to pour out. Pour out. Did you ever see a movie where there was a scene where somebody was trying to get somebody else intoxicated? They said, here, have another. Here, have another. That's Babylon. Here, have another. And they figuratively intoxicated the people around them. They took them over. And everything that happened was to the shame of those that they conquered. Okay, but it's coming back on Babylon. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. Getting back to that image of nakedness again, which is not physical necessarily, although sometimes they did parade slaves, prisoners around with, unclothed for purposes of shaming them. But I think it's more figuratively here what would happen to them. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you. Cup, you get the imagery there? Here, they're pouring out some drinks, have another one. Okay, but the cup of the Lord, what's in the cup of the Lord when he pours it out? As far as I know, in every passage in the Scripture, when the Lord pours out a cup, is it good or bad? It's bad. Okay. It's almost always used as something negative. When Jesus says, are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? What did the apostles say? Sure. What was that cup? Well, the cross. The cross. Okay. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon, that's why I pointed out that country a moment ago, will cover you. and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood and the violence of the land of the city and all who dwell in it. It's said that Lebanon was literally stripped to the point it was never the same country again. You know, they went in there, they wanted the trees, they hauled them over to the Euphrates or the Tigris, whatever river was closest there, and they floated them down to Babylon to use in their building projects. And they, what we would say today, denuded the country of Lebanon. They hunted their animals. And of course, when the trees are gone, where are the animals going to go? And so they literally ruined. So he's talking about a country here that's ruined. Now, focus on physical country, is that really what's important? But no, the people living in Lebanon, what did they have when they were gone? Their country was, you know, kind of like Jerusalem when they left, when Jerusalem was flattened in 586. Okay, what profit is the image that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of the mold should trust in it to make mute idols? Okay, they were filled with idolatry in Babylon. And they do such foolish things as take a piece of wood, make it look real pretty, cover it with some precious metal if they had it, and then say, teach me. Tell me something, God. Tell me something important. Teach me, you know, how to be who I want to be. And that was foolish. You remember Isaiah 44? If we'd had time tonight, I wanted us to read that, but we don't. But remember, the guy takes a piece of wood, he builds a fire with part of it, cooks his supper, then he takes the rest of it, makes it into an idol, and bows down to it. How foolish. And if we had time, we'd discuss how foolish some things are today, that we don't have literal idols. We make them ourselves, and then if we're not careful, we can fall down and worship them. Woe to him who says to wood, this little wooden statue, awake to the silent stone. Arise, it shall teach. Here's our teacher. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. And we sing that in our song, don't we? And sometimes I'm afraid we limit that to, hey, the Lord's with us here at the church building. No, that wasn't what Habakkuk was talking about. Oh, there's nothing wrong with those expressions right there. He's saying the Lord is living. The Lord is powerful. The Lord is in charge. That little piece of wood or stone that you've got is as dead as a doornail. It's not going to teach you. It's not going to help you. It's powerless. You made it yourself. How foolish can you be to think that you can worship it and it will help you? So, that I think that was our last woe there. Do we have time? No. Now, I wish we could read Isaiah 44, 9 through 19. If you want to, mark that down and read that tonight when you get home. Isaiah 44, 9 through 19. Because it's even a more interesting story of this guy that takes a piece of wood and, and tries to make something special out of it. Appreciate your comments and attention tonight.